Hello and welcome to episode number 10 already of PHP Release Radar. This time we have Dan Leech here and he's the creator of PHPBench. Before we start, welcome everybody in the stream as well on YouTube. There is a chat below the video, so if you have any questions about PHPBench for Dan, just drop them in the chat and we will ask him while we have this conversation about the tool and about his life as a maintainer. So welcome Dan. Thanks for joining us and congratulations, you did the 1.0 last Saturday or Sunday I guess. But before we start with the tool itself, can you give us a quick introduction? Who are you and how did you become a PHP developer?
Yeah, so hello everybody. My name's Dan, and I became a PHP developer after studying for music technology at college, and then realizing that I couldn't get a job. So I basically sort of picked up a PHP, I think it was PHP and MySQL book, and read it and made a website, and that was pretty much it. And then I think about 3 or 6 months later, I got a job.
That was a fast start, right?
It was pretty rapid. I mean, it's easy to pick up as well. I mean, I did, programming before that, sort of maybe 6 years before that, and then I had a big break, and went to university, and then after that, I thought, well, I could go back to programming. And I had some ideas to make, super websites. It was going to be a media website, sort of hosting artists' works and sort of offering some, I guess, social networking capabilities. And it was, it's a complete mess. But it got me started, yeah. And so after that, I felt a bit more confident in just making websites, I guess.
Yeah, that's quite the same how I started. Not doing my own MySpace, but doing my own CMS maybe.
Yeah.
But so you're working in Berlin nowadays, right?
Yeah. I've been in Berlin for about, I don't know how long I've been in Berlin for. I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4. After a certain amount of years, you sort of lose track. I think 3 or 4 years.
But still as a PHP developer, right?
Still a PHP developer, yeah. So I've been,
Alright.
quite a long time doing PHP. But also nowadays, also a little bit of TypeScript as of about a month ago. So.
Oh, you're heading more to the front end stack.
Not the front end. It's still the back end. It's still it's the Node side of it. So still a back end developer. Yeah.
So and the project we're talking about today is PHPBench, which was I think started, at least the first tag was in May 2015, so approximately 6 years ago from now. What is it, and what was the motivation for you to create this project?
So it's funny. So at that time, and I think maybe a year or two before that, I started working on the Symfony CMF. So even before that, I was working in Paris and I built I guess I call it now a startup, and I built a CMS using Symfony, the first version of Symfony, and I did that for about 3 years. And after that, it had some really good ideas and it had some pretty big mistakes in it as well. And after that, I really wanted to build an open source CMS. So I started, I left my job and I was going traveling. I thought, I'm going to start writing the CMS. And then what can I use to make CMS? And I saw the Symfony CMF project. I thought, okay, I can use this. And then I started finding bugs in it. Like with all things, it starts off by, fixing a bug in the document, fixing a typo in the documentation. And then it went gradually up to like making pull requests and fixing bugs in the PHP ODM and the Symfony CMF bundles and things like that. And slowly, that's how I started getting into open source. And so I did that for a couple of years, I think. And then I really wanted to make. So if you're not familiar with the Symfony CMF, which I doubt many people will be, it's sort of split between the Symfony framework part and then the content repository part. So the content repository part was this thing called PHPCR, or at least those were the interfaces that we used. And it's a port of a JCR, a Java specification called JCR, and it's a specification for a content repository. And behind that, I think Leap and other people have built a DBAL based content repository called Jackalope, which again could have DBAL behind it, or it could have Jackrabbit, which is this JavaScript thing. Anyway, that wasn't perfect. There were lots of issues with it, and I had some really good ideas about how to make a better one. So I thought, yes, in 2015 or maybe late 2014, I'm going to make a new content repository. It's going to be awesome. And the first thing I wanted to do is have some regression tests on because it had to be faster. Whatever it had to be faster than the original one. And this is the perfect scenario for benchmarking, right? Because you've got a spec, you can benchmark each sort of API call, and you can really get a good comparison. So I thought that'd be great. We'll start off by creating some benchmarks, and I used something called Athletic. And I don't know if you remember Athletic. That was no.
Not really.
It's quite good, but it had some weird quirks in it. I think you always had to extend this Athletic class, like in PHPUnit, which meant and it ran everything in the same process as well. So you always had, whatever you're running in memory, it's in that process as well. So I thought maybe I could make my own benchmarking framework. So I thought I just did something over the weekend, and I put it on Twitter. Said, "Oh, look at my new benchmarking framework," and people started liking it, and I got like 30 or 50 likes on the GitHub repository. I thought, that's amazing. I'm going to stop making this content repository now. I'm going to make a benchmarking framework. So that's kind of how it began. So I started off by wanting to make a content repository, and then I completely switched to making something else.
But it looks like you're not really intimidated by complex domains, right? I think a lot of people think benchmarking is quite easy, or at least PHP CR is quite complex as well, right? So
Yeah,
so
I'd say a lot more complex.
You're really interested in those complex domains, or how do you end up writing a benchmarking framework or your own implementation of PHP-CR?
I don't think I'm interested in complex domains. That's just unfortunately what I end up doing. It's never the intention, right? So I mean, the benchmarking tool isn't that hard. Basically, it's a for loop. Essentially, you've written it. For I equals 0, while I is less than 1,000,000. Do this thing, and then start time, end time, bang. That's your benchmarking framework. It's really easy.
Okay. So
what I managed to do is make it incredibly complicated.
I was asking, so why would it take 6 years to do a for loop? But that's maybe more about the features in the second half of this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't 6 years. So I worked on it quite a lot for about 6 months to a year. But after that, it really tailed off. I started working on this. Basically, I use Vim. I'm one of the people that use Vim, one of the 30 people in the Vim channel on the Slack, the Symfony Slack, right? And it really bugged me that I didn't have auto-completion, and things like this. And, I love Vim, but I didn't have the auto-completion. So then I started a project to make auto-completion in Vim, and that kind of spiraled out and took the next 3 years of my life, basically, and counting. But yeah, so I mean, I started it, and then really it tailed off for a long time. And it's only recently that I've started working on it, let's say, on a regular basis, and with a goal in mind, with the goal sort of being the 1.0 release.
So you mentioned Factor, right? It's the language server for Vim is called Factor, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's now a language server. There's the protocol called the Language Server Protocol by Microsoft. So it started off as just a command line tool basically, and then I developed like an RPC. Yeah, let's call it a protocol. So the editor could speak to it. And then, yeah, over time, the language server thing, so it merged from like a single short-lived process to being a long-lived process, and now it's a language server, yeah, with lots of problems.
So you ended up in a complex domain that time.
Very complicated. It's yeah, I think there's something like 50 repositories, which is a
Oh,
complete
wow.
nightmare, and I still can't quite bring myself to merge them all into a mono repo.
So is it when we look at Factor and when we look at PHPBench, is it just you need this tool and so you build it and then you have to maintain it because you own it, or how
It
does it
sounds
work?
like a good idea at the time, you know. But yeah, it's having a problem and wanting to solve it,
Mhm.
and then deliberately not looking at Google to see if there's like an existing tool.
So initially you wrote PHPBench to benchmark your implementation of PHPCR, and
Yeah,
do you still use PHPBench for side projects or in a professional in your professional life, or how do you gain new ideas and the target for 1.0?
exactly. So for a long time, I didn't really use it. Um, so I think I was working in Austria in a place called Massive for a company called Massive Art, and we're developing this thing called the Sulu CMS. And I remember sort of implementing it a little bit here, a little bit there, but it really never took off because there's nothing that. I mean, one of the big problems with PHP Bench for a long time, up until quite recently, is that you couldn't really do any regression testing with it. So you could write all these benchmarks and everything, but really, like, how useful are they if they're not run on a regular basis? If they're not actually protecting you against something? I mean, if you're really doing performance work, which I wasn't doing, then it can be quite useful. Um, so now lots of people are using it. Like the amount of people, the amount of installs is really so it's just going, it's almost exponentially up. And I think a lot of people know how to use it better than I do.
So do you get a lot of feedback? I saw there is already a patch release for the first stable version. So
Yeah, that was just me. Yeah, not a lot of feedback actually. I think it went quite quiet for a long time, which I think basically means it worked and it did what people expected. Early on, there were lots of feature requests for some of the things that have been implemented now, sort of especially around the ability to effectively compare to benchmarks. I mean, that's where the value is. It's always in comparison. And with the early versions, you couldn't really do that in a nice way. Um, what was the question?
no worries, no worries. Let's move on. I think there's we should just give a brief insight in what is it? How do I work with it? So we've been talking about
Yes.
measuring performance and benchmarking, but what does it mean? Is it like I know Tideways and Blackfire, or how do I use it?
So basically, it's like PHPUnit. It's very similar to PHPUnit. So the way you create a benchmark, you create a class, and within that class you have methods, and you put the code you want to benchmark in the method. And like PHPUnit and all test runners, you can do things. You can add hooks, so you can execute things before the subject. So the method is called the subject, and yeah, the whole class is called the benchmark. And you can have hooks before and after, and everything else you'd expect from a test runner, basically. So it's like PHP Unit. You can basically just specify a directory, and it will traverse the directory and find all the files that end with bench, and then just go through them and execute the benchmarks linearly.
So I would explicitly write such bench classes for parts of my application that are performance critical.
Yes.
Right? And then I have those code bits isolated like a unit to benchmark in a pipeline, for example, for regression tests.
Yeah. I mean, in a pipeline, that's quite a new concept, and that also has problems. But yeah, typically you'd write these things like you're saying, the performance critical parts of your code, and yeah, I mean, you could say, and it has to be less than 1 millisecond as an assertion. But yeah, maybe that's good enough. But typically, you can't really. That's the problem with benchmarking, is that it's completely dependent on the environment that you're benchmarking in. So 200 milliseconds on one computer is not the same as 200 milliseconds, or as the same code on another computer, and it's not even the same if you run the same thing in 10 minutes time, or even in a second's time. It's a very, but this is where the statistics come in. You basically have to take lots of samples. So how fast was it here? How fast was it there? And then you've got kind of a histogram of all of those different samples. And PHPBench is basically taking, using maths to determine what the most probable value is. It's kind of like the mean, but not exactly. It's something else, which I can't explain, but it's fine.
Well, that's what is more than just a for loop in a benchmark framework, right? So all this analytical stuff and statistical stuff on top of just running a specific code in a loop.
Yes, that, and the fact that it's basically for every iteration, for every sample that it's taking, it's launching a new process. So you start, it's a new process. It's got its own memory. It's got everything. So none of them are contaminated by the previous run, and they're also not contaminated with the presence of PHPBench, for example. So your benchmarks do not have a dependency on anything else, not even on PHPBench. So unlike PHPUnit or Athletic, which I mentioned earlier, you don't have to extend the PHPBench class. You don't have to import PHPBench classes. It's completely isolated. So you're literally just testing. All the PHPBench is spinning up a new PHP process, saying new benchmark, and then it's running your method it's still running it in a for loop. But
So when we talk about PHPUnit, I usually think of the testing permit, and then there is a unit layer, and then there's an integration or service layer, you name it, and then there is a functional and end-to-end layer on top.
Yeah.
So when I write my tests in PHPUnit, I usually think about which parts of the code I want to test in a certain manner. So how is it when I use PHPBench? Do I have to think about, well, I just want to test this public method? Or do I have to think about, I want to test integration of certain classes? Or do I usually do a full functional controller test with PHPBench? What would you say from your experience?
It depends on what. Of course, it depends on what you want to test. So if you're testing, you can unit test effectively. You can have your class, it's got a little algorithm or two in it, and you want to see how fast that algorithm is. So that's kind of what a unit test would be, right? And on the other hand, so for an example from Factor, it's basically a benchmark to test how fast it can reflect a property of a class and pull all that meter information, I think. And obviously that's a bigger test. There's a lot of dependencies. It's writing to the file system. It's doing all these things. So that's more of an integration test, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at least you've got those two levels, if it's helpful. As end-to-end tests, I mean, again, it depends how you define an end-to-end test. I mean, an end-to-end test for Factor, for example, would be spawning a CLI process and seeing how fast it will do the thing. For a browser, it's talking over the Chrome protocol, whatever it's called, and operating a headless browser. I would not say that PHPBench is really made for this. Right? I mean, you could use it for this, but yeah, it's not designed for that. It's designed for running code in a method. So yeah, you can't, for example, you couldn't, could you? You probably could, but you wouldn't, I don't think.
So yeah, to me it sounds reasonable that you want to focus on the PHP level. And
Yeah, I mean, I did have ideas. Maybe you could have a different type of executor that is executing something, and then returning a value, which you could then process. So you could have an HTTP executor, and then you could send a HTTP request, and then that executor would return, all that information, including the timing and I don't know whatever else is coming back from that response. But yeah, it's not, at least not yet. It's not made for this. You couldn't do load testing on it, for example. As soon as you start going down that road, it's looking more like JMeter.
yeah,
which would be great, but it's a long way from being that at the moment.
So it's not really in from my understanding, not really in competition to for example, JMeter, or not for Tideways or Blackfire, because they work on a lower level and of course on more a controller scenario, right?
Controller scenario.
Well, in Blackfire usually profile CLI commands or HTTP requests, and I think it's the same for Tideways. And if we say PHPBench is more like writing unit tests, it's more about isolated code fragments.
Yeah, there is some crossover. So one of the things that PHPBench does is profiling by Xdebug. So this is useful because you can have your unit and you can just isolate that and just profile that thing. And you can also plug in Blackfire. I mean, yeah, they're not in competition; they're complementary, really. So I think somebody is developing a Blackfire extension. I don't use Blackfire, but yeah, you could plug in Blackfire to generate those profiles for you. But that's the benefit, is that you're really concentrating, you're focusing on something, instead of, like you say, you've got the whole application with all these events firing off and all that sort of things, lots of noise. PHPBench is allowing you to focus, I guess.
All right, great. So it's an additional tool for our toolbox, so to say.
Yeah, I think so.
So how was the release process when we talk about the last 6 years, and you mentioned that you were starting only developing a half a year or year at the beginning, and then focusing over the last half year really strongly on this. So how did it come that you started again to work with PHPBench, and what was your motivation to do a stable release?
So I think it happened when I was on holiday last year, and I was, of course, you do what you do when you're on holiday, right? You program. So I was programming on Factor, and I needed to write some performance tests, and I thought, and I had my PHPBench there, everything's fine. I thought, but this could be so much better. This isn't, I should do some work on this. And then I looked at packages, and I noticed that, wow, people are actually using this thing now. And I pulled in Parsica. So when I was working on PHPBench, I wanted to use, I needed a parser for this expression language, which we might talk about later. And Parsica is using PHPBench. It's PHPBench has a dependency on something that's using PHPBench. I never would have Imagine that to start with. So I thought maybe now's the time to actually put some effort in. I mean, I had delayed it for a long time, mainly because I think when I started PHPBench, I really, any idea that came into my head, I had to implement it, no matter how crazy it was. So there was a lot of baggage in PHPBench, which I felt it was difficult to move that to 1.0 with that baggage there. So I decided to, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to remove some of this baggage to start with. I'm just going to pull these things out of PHPBench and forget about them. And then, I improved the logo. And I implemented the thing that was bugging me, which was being able to easily compare two separate runs. So this is probably the biggest feature in PHPBench. But that's when I said, okay, and I'm going to release 1.0. I don't know how long that's going to take, but I'm going to definitely start working on this again on a regular basis. And that was in September last year.
So it's more than half a year focus work on PHPBench to get it to the stable release. So quite a lot.
Stable.
But major release.
Yeah.
So I guess it's time to talk about features and what is now part of the first major release. But before we do this, I will hand over to Dennis to play a quick round of question game.
Exactly. I will share my screen, and it should be this one. And you should see the question. You already answered this one. Basically, it's just the reference question. But if you want, you can answer that. So Emacs, Nano, or VI?
None of the above, basically. So Vim. So I mean, more VI than the others. But I think Emacs is great, but I wouldn't know how to use it. And the same with Nano. Actually, I every time it loads up, I can't exit it. It's a nightmare.
But maybe you can answer a question for me that's not on. What is the difference between VI and Vim? To this day, I don't know. I know it's different, but I don't know how.
So Vim is VI improved. So Vim's better.
Oh, that explains it. Then on to the next question. Oh, it doesn't. Oh, that is Doctrine or Propel?
Doctrine. Okay.
No
need to elaborate. Okay.
If you want
XML.
You can elaborate. Sorry, I was too fast. So what did you want to say?
I don't know. Doctrine. It's. I won't say better than Propel, but Propel hasn't been getting much love for a long time, I think. Although I think somebody's just taken over big company's taken over the maintenance of it, more or less. But yeah, Doctrine, just Doctrine. JSON, XML, or YAML. I don't know. This is tricky, yeah. I mean, technically XML. Theoretically, that's the best. JSON is kind of okay, and YAML's a nightmare, but it's kind of easy to use, and it's got comments. So, I couldn't answer. I think if somebody forced me to use XML, I'd be angry.
What kind of for the configuration for PHPBench? Which format do you use?
That's JSON.
Yeah. Probably it would make sense to have multiple formats to support there. So, but how did you decide on JSON there?
I think at the time it was popular. I mean, Composer used JSON, and that was still quite a new thing. This is wonderful JSON configuration. You've got the all the parsing is built. Well, it was an extension, but all the PHPs had it. Yeah.
All right, next one. REST or SOAP?
REST.
Java or JavaScript?
I've never programmed in Java, but I'm going to say Java.
I will just keep it at that. Already at this one. So strict types on or off?
So I don't use strict types, but if they were magically enabled everywhere, I wouldn't mind, and I'd probably be a better person.
All right. And it's often coming up PHP CS fixer or code sniffer?
This is also tricky. So we at work we actually use. Well, I've always used PHP CS Fixer. At work we use Code Sniffer, and I think it's one of these things where PHP Code Sniffer is a lot older than PHP CS Fixer, right? But it's like SARM and PHP Stan. They're really kind of getting better simultaneously, right? I'm not sure there's a preference there. I mean, PHP CS Fixer's got there's a really great website where you can see all the fixes and this sort of thing. But yeah, I couldn't say between those two.
All right. And then last one, PHP Stan or SAM?
Exactly. So I'm a PHP Stan user. I'd like on new personal projects I've been trying to use some. I couldn't say. I mean, by default it'd be PHP Stan, but yeah, I'm some curious.
Okay, then thanks. And let's switch back to the questions. So we had too many questions. I forgot where we left off. So we just pick up where I think is fine. Let's start with PHPBench. How did you decide that you wanted your 1.0 to be 1.0? So basically, you said you wanted to have these features in there, but you didn't have to do a major release. So why did you want it to be a major release?
So in September I started the alpha thing. So I thought, you're never going to release PHPBench 1.0 if you don't sort of do something, right? So I tagged 1.0.0 dash alpha, and then I would, you're committed at that point. You can't really just go back, and I mean you could release sort of the 0 versions again, but yeah, I wanted to get that 1.0 out and actually start doing semantic versioning, actually to make some effort to polish it. And like I said, the biggest thing was removing some of the awkward features, which didn't need to be there.
Exactly, there is a question about this. Alexandra asked, the best part in programming is deleting code. Did you delete feature of PHPBench? And if so, are you afraid people will complain about the missing features?
So far, nobody's complained. So some of the features, so for example, there was doctrine deval storage for the benchmarks, which only kind of partially worked. So the amount of metrics that PHPBench can capture, they're sort of undefined. I mean, they're unlimited, really. You can add, whatever results you like to the results there, but the deval thing could only restore very specific ones. And alongside that was, I thought, you must be able to query historical benchmark data. So I wrote like a DSL, a JSON DSL for querying benchmarks. And I think that was the main thing actually that's gone. And there's self-update as well. I ditched that just because it was awkward and the package I was using wasn't maintained for a long time. And who needs self-update if you've got 5 to manage that anyway? So the question was, did anyone complain? No, they haven't yet. But I hope they don't have to, because nobody used them. They're just completely useless features that just added weight to the project, basically.
But what would happen if someone came up like, I have this idea, I need this, and it's something removed? Would you just say like, oh no, we had this, it doesn't work? Or would you think like, okay, maybe if people are asking for it, I just do it again, but in a different way?
No, I mean, if people can make extensions. PHPBench is extensible. You can, like Bhat or PHP spec or PHPUnit, you can write extensions and you can plug into it and you can write whatever you need to write. So yeah, maybe if it's a totally awesome idea, possibly, but if I need to pull in a third-party dependency into PHPBench to do that, then no, that would be an extension.
Makes sense. And for the 1.0 release, in terms of new features, you already mentioned that you wanted to have this kind of reporting feature. Are there any more things that were on the roadmap, or was it already enough work that you figured this is the thing and that's it?
Yeah, so assertions were part of the last release, which is 0.17, but they were very weak. You could basically have less than or more than, and then a number, and that was it. That was the assertion. You couldn't really select what you were asserting against, all this sort of stuff, because it would have been, you needed an expression language, you needed some sort of DSL to do this, or I couldn't think of any other way to do this. So that's one of the things I started working initially, like I mentioned, when I started using Pascal, and that sort of spiraled out of control, and I ended up writing a parser, but for this, and a complete custom expression language. Initially, just so it would work on PHP 7.2, and now I think it's probably fine if I drop 7.2. But anyway, Pascal uses 7.4, so that's probably too much, I think, because one of the things about benchmarking is it could actually be quite useful to test against earlier versions of PHP, right?
Okay, but since you mentioned PHP version, the minimum version right now is 7.2, you said, for PHPBench 1.0?
Yeah.
And do you plan on sticking with that version for a long time, or do you think that you will upgrade more often to basically get to 7.4 or maybe 8.0 to get new features in?
I mean, it's tricky. I mean, I'm not really missing any features at the moment. I think, the feature that's probably most applicable to PHPBench is the HR time, the sort of nanosecond level, because at the moment I'm using, PHPBench using microtime, which is microseconds, which, to be honest, is fine, because you're basically taking a measurement of how long it takes to do something, 1,000 times, 100,000 times, something like that. So microseconds, I think, is basically fine, because it's always going to take many microseconds to do that, and then you're dividing it and you're getting an average. But HR time would require some refactoring, I think, and I'm not sure if it's going to bring any value. But you wouldn't know that without doing some experimentation, which I haven't done at the moment. But otherwise, I mean, it would be nice as a developer to work with the more modern features, and because I'm not using any dependencies that have to work with which have a restriction on higher versions of PHP. It would be also possible to upgrade the code to PHP 8, and you could downgrade it with Rector, right, automatically or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a pretty new thing. I think Thomas wrote on this weekend.
Yeah, I think I just literally saw it in the Twitter feed. I thought, oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there is a question as well again. Is it okay to use still plain PHP today? So maybe that refers to your comment about if someone would include another third-party library or something.
So yeah, I mean, PHPBench is using third-party libraries. So it's not. It's funny. Initially, I did want it to be as lightweight as possible because I thought everything's going to be running in the same process, and I really want to keep the memory footprint down. So that's why it's got its own dependency injection container sort of built in and stuff like this. But I think it's got about 10 dependencies. But I don't want to pull in something like Doctrine Devel, right? Why would you want Doctrine Devel installed in your projects if you don't need Doctrine Devel, and then if you make it a dev dependency, then it's a bit awkward, I guess. But yeah, I want to keep it as, and of course, if you have big external dependencies of that, that's also a maintenance burden on you because you need to upgrade it and things like that. So I'm trying to keep it as minimal as makes sense, I guess.
But for a command line tool nowadays, it's quite well, usually or quite often projects use Symfony Console, for example. But
Yes.
I think Rector just use plain CLI handling itself, right?
Rector or PHPBench?
Yeah, sorry, PHPBench. Now I got
No. PHPBench is always used the Symfony console.
okay. So that's wrong memory of mine. Sorry.
Wait, now I lost my track. So we were at new features in the 1.0 release, and maybe you can, if someone already used PHPBench in an older version, in an 0 point something version, if they want to upgrade to the new version, you already mentioned you don't support the auto upgrade anymore. You say with 5 you can just install the new version, and that's
Yep.
fine. And once they do that, will everything still work, or do?
No.
Okay, then maybe let's go into detail. Why not, and what has changed from the user perspective?
So I wanted to make, one of the big reasons to go to 1.0 is just make those BC breaks, right? If you're going to do this, then now's the time. So actually not too much has changed. Nothing's really changed in the way you use PHPBench. The annotations are still the same. The way you write things are still the same. I've actually got a list of BC breaks. I think the biggest one is the configuration. So the configuration was quite ad hoc previously, what things were called, how they were organized. And now they were all configuration options are prefixed with, internally, all of the dependencies have been split out into individual extensions that, logical extensions that make sense. And then the configuration is now prefixed with that extension. So the path to the benchmarks is runner.path. The place where you store the XML is storage.xml path, and things like this. So it's just part of organizing the configuration a little bit. But the good news is now that the documentation, the documentation for the configuration is completely auto-generated. So previously there's very little documentation or very sketchy documentation. But now it's all generated, it's all accurate, and all of the options have been described. So upgrading should be quite easy. And if you do have something that isn't right, then PHPBench will shout at you and say, "Yeah, I didn't recognize that, but yeah, is it one of these 500 options?"
All right. And did you already get feedback from people who updated, or are you trying to get feedback from them? How the process was, maybe
No.
what kind of improvements they're missing for maybe a 2.0?
No, there's some positive feedback. I think Alcrimius. So Alcrimius has been quite promoting. So Marco from I'm not sure if he still does Doctrine. But yeah, he's been quite active in promoting PHPBench and adding it to people's libraries. So he gives some good feedback about the comparison feature, for example. That he's found that really useful. Otherwise, yeah, just some keep up the good work kind of comments on Twitter, that sort of thing. So, I mean, I am getting sort of feature requests now. I think maybe as it's becoming more popular, then people are asking for features, and some people are even offering to sponsor me to do these features, which is quite nice. But nothing that's going to necessitate a 2.0 at the moment, at least.
And you already mentioned that you have an extension point for PHPBench, so that people can basically, if they want something in PHPBench and they implement it themselves, they can basically provide it as an extension for other people as well. And I saw in the documentation that there's already an Xdebug integration. And you're probably maintaining that yourself, right?
Actually, that's built in. So that previously was a kind of built-in, non-enabled extension that you could enable. But yeah, I deleted some of the features from this that were less useful. So now it's a single extension that provides a single feature, which is profiling with Xdebug. But that's hard-coded now into the core. So you've always got that available. But yeah, the extension points are still there. You can still write extensions. So I'm hoping, and the documentation has also been improved. So this is another big thing with the 1.0, is really improving the documentation. And lots of the documentation now, it's the examples are real examples that are included from an example directory that gets executed in the CI. And you know, the things you see on the website, especially for the customization, so it tells you how to write an extension, and gives you some examples, and that they're all executed in CI, so that they're accurate. So I'm hoping that that there might be some more extensions with 1.0. Yeah.
And then also noticed that the documentation is very cat-centric. How did that come about?
Yeah, I think you're talking about the cat progress logger, right?
Yeah, exactly. The cat progress thing, and there's another report thing where is it a cat or dog thing? Are cats dogs? So
Are cats dogs?
cat emojis.
Yeah, I did that when I was staying at my brother's, and he's got cats and dogs. I guess this was just on my mind at the time. Yeah.
All right. And you already mentioned that someone is working on a Blackfire integration as an extension. Are you planning? All right. So,
Yeah.
are you planning on providing extensions yourself for things, or do you say that no, the extensions is completely open for other people, and everything I will focus on is the core PHP bench?
I think it basically comes down to I wouldn't just write an extension for the sake of writing an extension, right? So if I needed an extension, then I'd write it. Yeah, but I wouldn't. If somebody says, "Oh, I really like this extension," there's not much chance that I just write it for them. No.
So there is a comparison feature that that you mentioned, and I understood that this was one of the key goals in the release.
Yeah, well, yeah, comparison and assertions, and by way of that, this expression language came out. Came out of that. You know, how to write an assertion, and then the expression language got more powerful. And one of the pieces of baggage that was in the old PHPBench was the reporting engine. It did some maybe unnecessary stuff, and some of it was very fixed. And actually, I made it worse when I introduced the comparison feature in the early alpha versions, because it was just hacking on top. You know, just getting it working so that it was actually useful or more useful than it was. But it really highlighted how much extraneous rubbish was around this stuff, right? There's lots of stuff that didn't need to be there. So when I finished the assertion stuff and I had this expression language, I thought, I wonder if I could refactor the reporting stuff to use expressions. And And that's what I did. So now, the whole reporting stuff that was there has been thrown away, and it's been replaced with, with one based on expressions.
So I do have a run of PHPBench, and there is an artifact, and then I have another one in the pipeline to have assertions between them, or how does it work? Because we have to have a delta, right? It's not
Yeah,
like
exactly.
PHP unit where I can say this is the functionality and it still needs to be green.
Not yet, at least. But yeah, exactly. So even in the old PHPBench, you could store benchmarks, and yeah, it would store them in some XML file, in some folder. So the challenge was not how so much, because that's quite obvious, but being able to reference a previously, and then I think the concept of a tag was introduced. I'm not sure at what point, but so you tag a benchmark. So you'd run the benchmark, you tag it with some arbitrary name, like a master. If you're on the master branch and you switch to your branch and you run it, and then you use ref, like reference. So you say ref equals master. And so then when it's running, it will load up that master run that you just did. And as you're going through, even as you're seeing the progress for each result, it will show a comparison with the same, if it exists, the same subject from the master branch. So you get, and that's another really nice improvement in 1.0. You get feedback a lot faster. So you don't have to wait for all of your benchmarks to run and then run a report and then sort of scrutinize, like 10, 100 numbers to see if there was a regression or not. If there's, now if there's a regression, you see a big X if you've got an assertion, and you see the percent difference immediately as you're running it.
So, but the assertions are way different as well, right? It's not like same as or assert equal, and there is the DSL.
It's
right?
Yeah. So the DSL. So essentially, it should be less than this, or it should be less than or equal to this. So you're saying it should be less than or equal to the baseline. And on top of that, you can specify a tolerance. So you can say less than or equal to the baseline plus or minus 10%. Or, I think the percentage is the most useful one, but you're not limited to that. You can say plus or minus, 10 milliseconds or whatever. And the other thing that DSL adds is you can specify the time unit. So you say 10 seconds is less than 100 milliseconds or whatever. And you can also specify how that should be. Yeah, you can do lots of stuff, basically. So I think a DSL was required to do this effectively. Like, you couldn't use the Symfony expression language, I don't think, because it doesn't let you really change the DSL, right?
So this is where Parsica kicks in, right?
This is where Parsica can kick in, yeah. But yeah, like I said, I chose something simpler to start with. I used the Doctrine parser because of the 7.2 requirement, and then I ended up writing my own parser. In the meantime, I actually wrote a dot block parser for Factor, just for fun. And then when I finished that, I was quite happy with it. So I thought, I'm going to write another parser. So I think I made the parser for PHPBench three times. And yeah, not entirely happy with it, to be honest. I think the one I wrote for Factor was better. But yeah, it is what it is at the moment.
But since it's a 1.0 release, do you think you can make fixes to the parser if you have an epiphany like, this is how it should be now? Because I mean, it's a tool. It's not like a library that well, you don't really depend on the internals of PHPBench as much.
Yeah, this is kind of a grey area, I guess. I mean, you could. I'm not sure if you can extend the expression language. I hope you can, right? Because that's good for me. But yeah, I think one problem with this, the backwards capacity thing is that once you get the dependency injection container, which you get with an extension, you have access to everything basically. And I'm not sure I made everything final, which I probably should have done. So yeah, there might be, like changing the expression language. I think I can happily refactor that. I don't think it's even possible to extend that at the moment. Yeah, pretty sure it's not possible. Like certain things have, so the DI container has, like Symfony has tags. So you can tag in a new progress logger, you can tag in a new executor if you want to execute your benchmarks in a different way. But for example, the expression language, there's no way to extend it in this manner, at least not at the moment.
All right. Let me see if we covered everything. So we had all the regressions, we had the new features, we had how can we upgrade. What we didn't talk about, well, we already mentioned it. You mentioned it already that you basically don't see anything that would require a major release that needs a 2.0. What do you think would be such a thing that you would say like, oh, this is the new major version? This is the next big thing in PHPBench.
I'm not sure. I mean, one thing which I'm not that happy with is, and it hasn't changed since the beginning, is the runner, and how it's. I mean, even in 1.0, it got a lot better actually, but and the progress loggers are a bit. Yeah, I'm not sure how they could be better, but I think they could be better, and that's a public API, and if people are customizing the progress loggers, then that would need to be a 2.0, right? Because that's an extension point. But yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things that would be nice is being able to run benchmarks randomly. So at the moment, everything's sequential. So you start off and it will execute all the benchmarks in this class and all the benchmarks in this class and all the ones in this one. What would be nice would be to randomly execute these iterations, right? So then if you're the load on your laptop's going like this, you'd get that unevenness distributed over the different iterations. But at the moment, if your loads go like that for whatever reason, then those benchmarks will suddenly go up, but these ones will be low. So I think that would be very nice, but that would be quite a big change. Doesn't necessarily have to be a 2.0 though. It depends if that's solved or how that's solved. Yeah.
And right now you're primarily working on PHPBench alone, or are there already contributors that would basically help out with those kind of features?
So far, not that many contributors. I mean, most of the contributors, it's been small fixes. Nobody stepped up, I don't think, ever really to for a big. I mean, it's been sort of medium things, but no big refactorings, which is fine really. So yeah, lots of little bug fixes and things like that, typos in the documentation, that sort of thing. But as of yet, no big contributors, no.
And basically, people want to do these kind of contributions, like small fixes or anything. How would they do it? Just go to GitHub. Do you have something like easy fix or something like that, or
Easy fix?
like easy picks for that?
Oh, easy fix.
If you don't know the project that well yet, that this is a good thing to start if you want to dive in.
Yeah, well, one of the things I did was delete all of the issues.
That makes things easier.
So yeah, I really culled like a lot, because there's so many issues. There's so many old ones that have been there forever. So I think there's about 6 issues now. And yeah, I did actually add an easy fix tag. But of course, if it's an easy fix, then I'm probably going to fix it easily, right? Unless I'd leave it there as an easy fix, just in case somebody wants to pick it up. But yeah, I mean, if you find a bug, yeah, make a PR. I think that's basically how it works. And if people want to actively get involved, the documentation's a good start. I think I put a lot of effort into the documentation, but not. Yeah, I think it still could be more consistent, and I think there's still places which are not that good. And almost certainly lots of typos because I didn't actually get around to installing a spell linter on Sphinx.
All right, and if you say that probably contributing small changes like doc changes and maybe fixing typo in the code base here, that's easy. But once you go above that, because you need all the math stuff, the internals can be quite tricky. It's probably hard to pick up. Are people able to help in other ways if they're not familiar with the domain to basically contribute in other ways than just code?
I mean, the biggest thing really is feedback. So like I say, I'm not using this all the time. Even if I would use it now in projects, especially with the new features. It's it might be a month or two. I mean, I'm on the beginning of a new project now, and I'm not sure when we're going to get to those performance critical pieces of code that we need to write. It could be next week, it could be in 2 months. But people are using this now. People are using this tool, and so I'd really love to hear people's feedback about what they think could be better. What would deliver value for them, I guess. What's a pain, what annoys them, and of course what they like. But nobody goes up and puts an issue on GitHub and says, "Yeah, this is fantastic." I mean, some people do, but it's usually followed but what about this?
All right, that's all the questions that I have. Christopher, do you still have something?
No, I just know that my last usage is, I think, 2018 or 19, so I need to have a look again. And I know that teams at my workplace are looking into it, and I make sure that they give you feedback if they see something.
Yeah, definitely.
Great, and I think it's not even needed to open a GitHub issue to say thank you. You can just use Twitter or something. I know you are on that as well.
Yeah, there's a PHPBench Twitter account, and yeah, there's my Twitter account as well. And there's also a very not used, I'd say, Slack channel in the Symfony Slack for anybody that's on the Symfony Slack and they want to have some more immediate interaction. Then that's the place to do that currently, I guess.
Yeah, and I guess you can find the Symfony Slack on symfony.com/support or something. I guess that's the entry point.
Google, yeah.
All right, so Dan, thanks a lot for talking to us about your project. Thanks a lot for everyone to joining us tonight. And I think our next episode is in about 3 weeks, right, Dennis? It's about Symfony.
Symfony 5.3. I don't have the exact date right now. I have to look it up. We have it.
I think it's Wednesday, 2nd of June. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good night. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.